about, it says, the prophet is closer to the believers than their own selves, and his wives are their mothers. And here in the footnote of Yusuf Ali 3674, in spiritual relationships, the prophet is entitled to more respect and consideration than blood relations. The believers should follow him rather than their fathers or mothers or brothers where there is conflict of duties. He is even nearer, closer, that is, to our real interest than our own selves. Now listen to what Yusuf Ali says here. In some kiras, now what's a kira? In some readings, what is a reading? That's a variant. That's a different manuscript of the Quran. Yusuf Ali, before we read anything else, Yusuf Ali, this Muslim who does everything he can in his translation to hide embarrassing parts of the Quran with elusive and even wrong translations from Arabic to English, here, I think unwittingly, admits that there's more than one Quran. In some kiras, that's other Qurans, that's other readings. Someone said, well, kira is not Quran. That's another reading. That means there's other text of the Quran. And some kiras, like that of Ubay ibn Ka'b, Ubay ibn Ka'b followed a different Quran, Brother David. Yusuf Ali says so, and so do all of the commentaries, do they not? Occur also the words, and he is a father of them. You can study the argument if you want, but the point is very clear. It's undeniable throughout Muslim history that there is different readings, that there were wars, that there were fights in Islam over which reading of the Quran to go with.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it always like this in Islam?
Yeah.
Muslims have a belief.
Yeah.
If you take that belief and there's evidence to examine, you're supposed to examine the evidence and then determine whether your belief is true or false.
Yeah.
Muslims have several beliefs. Every time we can examine a Muslim belief that doesn't conform to Christianity, the Muslim belief turns out to have all the evidence in the world against it.
Yeah.
Muslims say the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Well, we have a ton of evidence. We have a ton of Muslim sources. We even have a book, the Kitab al-Masahif, written by the son of the author of Sunan Abu Dawood. His son put together a book on all the differences in the Quran. We have a ton of evidence to examine. What do we find when we examine that Muslim belief that the Quran has been perfectly preserved? We find every shred of evidence we have tells us that view is false, and Muslims still say it anyway. Muslims say the Quran is a scientific masterpiece. Well, every single scientific claim we can examine in it that wasn't obvious to everyone is false. It's completely false. And Muslims will believe it anyway. Muslims say Jesus was just a prophet who didn't die on the cross and didn't claim to be divine and didn't rise from the dead. Every shred of historical evidence we can find says that the Muslim belief about Jesus is false, and they still believe it anyway. They say Muhammad had a high view of women. They say that in the West. They don't say that in the Muslim world. But they say that here in the West. And every single shred of evidence we can find from the time of Muhammad, beating wives, saying that women are intellectually deficient, that's why their testimony is worth half that of a man. Every single piece of information we can find about Muhammad's view of women tells us he certainly had a very low view of women. And yet Muslims still make the claim. And they say Muhammad was the greatest moral example in history. Almost every detail we can examine about his life certainly doesn't put him in the category of greatest moral person of all time. We've said this before, I'll say it again. Muhammad had some good characteristics. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying he was the devil or something like that. Muhammad had some good moral characteristics, but he did some things that would get him so many prison sentences in the world. He better be preaching to people in prison, because I mean, I'll say, if we made a list of the 10 worst things a person could do, I'd say Muhammad probably did about 7 of them. About 7 of the worst things we can imagine a person doing. And Muslims will turn around in spite of all this evidence and just say he's the greatest moral person in all of history. Every time Muslims make a claim, and we can investigate that claim, the Muslim belief turns out to be false, totally contrary to every shred of evidence we have, and the Muslims say, well, we believe it anyway and you can't refute it.
Brother David, real quickly before we go to the next call, and I think we've got Manu waiting for us. Thank you for waiting. We'll be right with you. You know, the Islam is having success, at least some success, in the prisons. And I was just thinking, the types of things that Muhammad did, which is very clear according to the Quran and the Hadith and the Sirah literature, those types of things are, in today's Western culture, illegal. But they're very attractive to many of the inmates. And I wonder, what's the attraction of Islam to these inmates? It allows them to sin, to kill, to murder, to have sexual relations with more than one woman, things that Western secular society that was at one time based on Christian values does not allow. It makes sense that Islam should succeed in the prisons.
Even then, I've said on this show many times that Islam can only thrive in an atmosphere of ignorance, where people don't know anything about what Islam actually teaches, which allows Muslims to go in and completely misrepresent what their religion teaches to appeal to their listeners, to distort the teachings of Islam. Because again, in Islam, there's no concern for accuracy when you're preaching to people. If you have to be violent towards them, if you have to deceive them, no matter what you have to do, you do whatever you can to convince them that Islam is true. Even in prison where there are certain things that would appeal to inmates, if inmates in this country knew that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl, if this were common knowledge in the prison system, no one would convert to Islam. They have absolutely no respect for people who are attracted to young girls or boys in the prison system. Islam would end in the prison system if that one simple belief became common knowledge. So even in the prisons where Islam is spreading so rapidly, if people just knew the truth and the facts about Muhammad, we would see Islam grind to a halt.
Well, may that truth come quickly. Well, we only have 7 minutes before the next break. Let's take the next caller right now. Welcome, you're on the air with Jesus or Muhammad. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello, this is Manu. How are you?
I'm good.
Manu!
How you doing, Manu?
Hi.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you, sir.
Tonight's topic, we could probably spend an hour over it, but I know you don't have an hour.
Yeah,
and,
that's true.
So let's stick with a couple of points.
Okay.
In chapter 37, the word for star is different than the word used for shooting star. So despite of, and you know my position on hadith, I never rely on hadith or put any weight on it.
Manu, I'm not gonna correct you on this yet. I'm just going to say here at the beginning, I agree with you. I agree with you that if we are not interpreting the Quran in the light of the hadith and the commentaries, that some of these problems aren't as bad. So, in other words, some of the problems that I find in the Quran are amplified by the commentaries and what the early Muslims believe. So you're right, because your position is you reject the hadith and you reject the commentaries and you just go with the Quran. So I'm going to agree with you. I think that what we find in the Quran would not be as troubling without the hadith. But go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I do believe that the hadith complicates a lot of things.
True.
Now, in terms of taking an overall view of the 7 heavens and 7 earth, we can go to chapter 42:29, and God clearly explains that. He says, I'm going to read the translation, and of his signs is that he created the heavens and earth and what he scattered in them from creatures, and he is able on gathering them together when he wants. That's 42:29, I believe. So when we view that God is talking about a universe and what he scattered of creatures in him, then the view of 7 heavens would not become like stacked as what they imagine, but it's an infinity. And when Quran again talks about of earth being 7, if we just rely on Quran and not on the hadith and other people's imagination at that time, 1400 years ago, we come to the conclusion, at least for me, I come to the conclusion that God means of the earth, of this biosystem, there are other ones in the universe, because that goes again with this verse that says what he scattered in them of creatures.
Brother Manu, that is, Manu, just a moment. So you're telling me that you believe that the Quran teaches